Hey guys, thanks for joining me. I'm Mike. You're at 3 Mississippi, and today we're going to talk about food banking. Just like it's a good idea to put a little money aside every payday, hide it under the mattress or wherever you like to hide it. What you're doing is you're protecting your family from a future financial hardship, and that's a smart thing to do. I hope you guys are all doing that. What we're going to talk about is doing the same thing with food. Putting some food away, banking some food. That's what a food bank is here at 3 Mississippi. And there are a lot of ways to do that, okay? We've talked about some of the ways that we like to food bank. We're going to be doing more videos on food banking, and we're going to try to get specific in some of these videos about how to do each thing, okay? One of the most important ways to bank food, in my opinion, is to pressure cook, jar your own meat, okay? Now, to some people that's very intimidating, and I don't know why. Maybe just because they think pressure cookers are bombs. Look, we're gonna break it down for you guys right now. I am gonna set your mind at ease and show you how simple it is and how important it is and how much it makes financial sense to can your own meat and bank some food and protect your family from a food shortage, a financial hardship, whatever it may be. We're going to set your mind at ease. Let's do this. Okay guys, before we get into how I'm gonna can this meat, let's talk about the why. 3 very important reasons that I feel you should be doing this. The first is this protects your family from a crisis. And we're gonna get into how it protects your family from a crisis. Second, this can save you a ton of money. And as we get into this and talk about it, you're gonna find out how much money and how it can save you that money. Thirdly, this time I got it right. Thirdly, this can really provide you with peace of mind in regards to the quality of the food and the ingredients in that food that you're feeding to your family. And this is a big one nowadays. Okay, item number 1. How does this protect you and your family from a crisis? Well, let's define the crisis. Actually, it really doesn't matter which crisis we're talking about. This could be a financial collapse of the government. Hopefully not. This could be issues with transit and the grocery stores cannot get product. Remember that happened not too long ago. This could be a crazy storm that knocks the grid down in your area for 7-8 days like happened in Texas a couple of years ago. This could just be not just because it would be also bad, but it could be as simple as you've come across financial hardships and you have a difficult time figuring out where you're going to get a couple of dollars to go buy food for your family. Well, when you put food away in jars like this and you put it on the shelf, this is some pork right here that I canned. You put it on the shelf. This is shelf stable, guys. This is going to sit on that shelf. And you don't need refrigeration, you don't need a freezer. It's just gonna sit there and wait until your family needs to open this and eat it, okay? Now, you can do this with any kind of meat. I have some chicken breast here that my wife loves to make a chicken salad out of. In fact, we have some in the fridge right now that she made last night. This right here is bone-in chicken. I took thighs and drumsticks, left the bone in them, and canned the whole thing. So I've got my dark meat here, I've got my white meat here, I have pork right here, and then you've got the broth. Some of you guys are going and you're spending money buying broth, and that broth has a shelf life just like this does. And then you have broth that you can use to make rice, which is also hopefully sitting on the shelf. By putting this food in a shelf-stable condition on the shelf, you're preventing the need for refrigeration and special environmental conditions, and you're preventing the need for money down the road when you're in a crisis situation to get food to feed your family. It's right here. All right, you're saying, well, that's all well and good, but how does this save me money? How does this save my family money. First of all, if you wanted to go to the store and buy canned meat, potted meat, canned tuna, canned chicken, it's extremely expensive, okay? If you want to buy the food you need as you need it in smaller quantities, you're spending a lot more for that food, right? So if I go to the store and I buy a package of chicken breasts and I cook those chicken breasts and feed that to my family this week, I'm gonna be spending $4 or $5 a pound for that chicken breast. But if I go to the store and I buy whole chickens, okay, I'm going to be spending $1.99 a pound, depending on where you are and when you watch this video. Then I take that whole chicken back home and I put a little labor into it, okay? I'm also, while I'm doing this, I'm teaching myself a very important skill, okay? Which leads to sustainability, all right? It's extremely important to have these skills. You can't just read a book or watch a video and have these skills. You need to practice them. So I take these whole chickens home, okay? Instead of buying, I spend the same amount of money on whole chickens that I was gonna spend on, say, just chicken breasts. And I break those birds down and I put some breasts over here that I'm gonna grill and some breasts over here that I'm gonna can, and maybe I break the wings off and I throw those in the freezer because I'm gonna make chicken wings. Notice how I still have these comfort foods out of this situation that I'm talking about. But meanwhile, I have a pile over here of things that I'm going to put up for my family. And I'm gonna use the carcasses from those chickens to then make broth, okay? So nothing gets wasted. When you go to the store and buy broth, that's something extra that you're spending that you didn't even have to spend. You could have made it yourself, and it literally would have cost you the water that you put into the broth, because, and maybe a little garlic and some onions, right? But you had this carcass that you were not gonna get by buying chicken breasts. So when it's all said and done, you wind up with some chicken breasts that you can throw on the grill, some wings that you can then cook up and have a wings night, maybe 2 dozen, depending on how many chickens you were working with, maybe a dozen or 2 dozen jars of broth and a dozen jars of meat that is shelf stable, okay? And you have saved yourself a lot of money. I'm actually gonna do a video where I'm gonna go to the store and I'm gonna buy these different items and compare it. But I assure you, doing it this way will save you a ton of money. Go look at those lesser preferred cuts of beef, okay? A roast that needs to be slow cooked in order to be tender. It'll be much cheaper per pound than the higher quality cuts of meat. You buy that roast, you take it home, you break it down into cubes about this size right here, and you jar it and you put it on the shelf. When you open that jar, it's gonna be like shredded beef. It's just gonna break apart. It's gonna be so tasty. And you will have saved per pound of meat a ton of money by doing it this way, okay? Because if you try to buy beef in quantity and store it in the fridge or store it in the freezer, you only have so much freezer space. And then when you have that crisis situation or the grid goes down, what are you doing with all of that meat that's now gonna go bad, okay? You're going to save your family a lot of money when you start thinking about canning your own meat and banking it. And then item number 3, which is really on a lot of people's minds nowadays, and it's super important, is the peace of mind of knowing the quality of the food that you're feeding your family and what ingredients are in that food, what kind of additives. Remember, the major food companies out there, really the most important thing to them is profit, okay? Profit trumps everything. You guys have heard the stories of the pink sludge that's in hamburger and what they make chicken nuggets out of at some places. And when you grind something up, you might be using some pieces of the meat that might not even have been what you wanted to put in your system to add to the weight. When you put your own food into jars and put it up, you know exactly what's going in that jar. You know what additives are going in that jar, if any. Maybe you add a pinch of salt, or maybe a clove of garlic, and that's all. I added a clove of garlic and a little bit of black pepper to these before I put them up. I know exactly what's in this. I know what cut of meat is in this. I know that I did not grind up any pieces of the bird or the deer or the cow or the pig that I did not want to feed my family and mix them in there as filler. I have peace of mind that when I pull this off the shelf and I feed it to my family, I know exactly what's in it because I put it there. All right, we're about to get into some canning now, guys. So let me show you the very few items that you're gonna need. All right, you are gonna need a few things in order to do this, and I'm gonna show you exactly what those items are right now. Okay, you're gonna need a canner. This right here is an All-American. It's a little on the high end. You don't necessarily need one quite this fancy, but I will put a link to this canner in the description below. I feel like this is a really good investment because it's going to last for a long, long time. I love the way it's made. It's American made, and it's just my choice, okay? Then you're gonna need some jars, guys, okay? Some sort of a large pot to wash these jars in, or rather to boil these jars in to sterilize them, okay? Now, this item right here is what I like to use to lift my jars, okay? You see that right there? Now what I'm gonna do with this water that just came off of a boil is I'm going to dump it right into my lids, just like that, okay? And then I'm gonna take all these jars out and put them over here upside down to start to drain so that they're ready to pack. And I like to use this little funnel right here to put in the top of the jar and drop the meat in. It helps keep the, contaminants from getting on the rim of the jar, which we'll talk about in a minute. And then of course, you've got your rings. So your lids, your rings, your jars. I like to use this little magnet right here for picking my lids up out of the hot water. And that's about it. Those are the items that you're gonna need to get started. And a really good idea for you guys to try is find a neighbor, find a friend that wants to get into canning and go in together on a canner, okay? You're only gonna use this a few times a year. We use ours quite a bit. We use ours at least monthly, sometimes a couple times a month. But when you're first getting into this, go in on it with somebody else. And you guys can have a canning party, or you can take turns. I got it this weekend, you got it next weekend, and help cut down on the investment there until you've convinced yourself, which you will quickly, that wow, I need this. This is a game changer. So there you go. Let's get to canning. Okay, remember I said you could use any kind of meat to do this. What I have right here is some deer meat. This is actually a sirloin off the back leg. This is the other sirloin off the back leg. And this is part of one of the front shoulders. Now, some of the rest of the back leg I used to make other things. I took the bottom rounds and used those to make jerky. We'll do a video on that. I used the top rounds to make a roast. Remember, we're diversifying. We're not putting everything on the shelf. We're doing all kinds of different things with it. So here's a bunch of back leg and shoulder, and then here are some that I already cubed up. Look at that size. That's kind of what we're looking for, all right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this front shoulder here and I'm gonna clean it up. And I'm just gonna remove some of these bits right here. And depending on where you get your meat from and what it looks like when you get it, you may or may not need to clean it up. And to what extent is completely up to you. I like to, with deer meat, I like to remove as much of the fat as I can. And then this right here, we'll get this little piece off. This right here, silver skin, can be quite chewy. So I'm just gonna remove a little bit of this, all right, with my boning knife, kind of like a fillet knife, right? And just take that off of there as much as I can. I'm going kind of fast right now. Now, this front shoulder right here actually could be portioned out into two steaks. There's another piece of silver skin down the middle there, and I could fillet this or kind of butterfly this right there, open it up and separate the lower muscle group from the top muscle group and have two kind of like skirt steaks there, okay? But I'm not gonna do that because I already did that with the other front shoulder. And for me, getting some of this onto the shelf is important. So again, I'm removing some of the silver skin, especially towards the ends there where it kind of turns into tendons. And the rest of this, the smaller pieces, you know, when you pressure cook something, it really tenderizes even the toughest things. So some small pieces of the silver skin in there are not going to hurt anything. They're going to fall apart later. So now I'm going to take this shoulder and I'm going to cut it into pieces about that big, okay? Just like that. And then I'll turn it this way, and again, I'm kind of cubing it up, right? Again, I got some stuff there that I don't really want, okay? So I'm going to cut that out. I'll just leave that little piece, put that, all right? There we go, all right? Those are about the size that I want. So now, I'm just going to quickly do the same thing here. Again, this is what some people would call the sirloin. And you could make steaks out of this. You could make a roast out of this. You could part this out. You've got the little tri-tip that comes up onto the top. You could remove that piece separate and break this into a couple of other muscle groups. And you could get some really nice steaks or a roast out of it. In fact, I'll show you. If I cut this like this right here, you know, what does that look like? That looks pretty nice. It's almost like a salmon steak. But like I said, I have plenty of steaks already out of the last couple of deer that we've processed, and this one right here I want on the shelf. So this sirloin is not a very tender cut. You know, when you pressure cook it, it really does come out like shredded beef. So I'm just going to take this whole sirloin and I'm gonna break it into some big chunks like this right here, okay? And then kind of chunk that out like this. And those are what I'm gonna jar. But I will say real quick that I like to remove as much fat from a deer as I can, because deer fat doesn't taste very good. There's that little tri-tip I was telling you about. You see that kind of coming off of there. If you're familiar with with tri-tip on a beef, obviously it's much bigger, but that's it right there. It just kind of hangs off the top of that sirloin, right? And now we're down to, whoo, this thing is cold. Still got some ice right there. And there we have it, guys. There's several pounds of venison that we're about to put into jar. All right, guys, now the fun part. You're not gonna believe how easy this is. So I'm gonna take my jars here that I have boiled and sanitized, and I'm gonna literally just take some meat and start dropping it down into the jars, okay? Just like that. And I'm just gonna kind of push them down in there. Now, this is what's called cold packing, guys. Notice how I did not brown this meat. I did not cook it first. I'm not going to, all right? There's all different kinds of things you can do. I'm doing what's called a cold pack right here because I want to show you guys the easiest way to do this, all right? Now, take a look at that filled jar. Notice I've got about a 1/2 inch of headspace right there, okay? And I did not add any liquid to this. Like, oh, that's crazy. Nope, don't have to. This meat is gonna make its own liquid and it's going to be just fine. So again, I'm gonna pack all these jars and get them to within a 1/2 inch of the top, just like that. That just filled 9 jars, guys. 9 jars of meat, animal protein right here. And that's got a decent amount of weight to it. Each one of these jars could feed my family for a day. Add a little bit of rice, right? And again, in a situation where we couldn't get food, I could take a little bit of rice off the shelf in one of these jars and I could feed my family just off of what I've done right here in a bag of rice. I could feed my family for 9 days. And this is just one little quick afternoon canning, okay? This is why this is such a big deal. So let's go to the next step. We're gonna get these things into the canner. All right, guys, I'm just gonna take a little bit of this pink Himalayan salt here. I like to do like a 1/4 teaspoon per jar, okay? Just put it in there right on top. It's gonna mix all in with it during the cooking process. You know, while salt does add a little bit of flavor, it also kind of brings out flavor, and it also really helps kind of preserve things. So I just like to add it. It's actually not a requirement. Then, after I've done that, after I've put everything in the jars that I'm going to put in the jars, I need to make sure that I'm going to get a seal right here, okay? So I'm going to take a little bit of vinegar, all right, and a paper towel, and I'm just going to wipe the top of that rim of each of these jars, okay? And what that's doing is making sure that I didn't get a little bit of meat or a little bit of salt or whatever on the top of that jar that's then going to prevent my lid from properly sealing. Hold on to this. Now, we take our lids, remember that little magnet I showed you? And we lay our lids on top of every jar. Just like that. Now, put our rings on. And remember, this thing's gonna be cooking. The idea behind pressure cooking is that you're increasing the barometric pressure inside the container and increasing the temperature at which water boils, essentially. You need these jars to be able to burp, all right? And by burp, I mean pressure and steam are gonna build up inside these jars, and it's gonna wanna burp out, all right, a little bit. So just put that thing on there about finger tight like that, okay? Just so it holds the lid in place. That's all you need to do. You don't wanna crank that thing down real tight. Just like that, these are ready to put in the canner. Okay, my pressure canner's ready to rock here. It's all cleaned out. I'm gonna take my bottom, put it in there, okay? It's gonna hold the jars just off the bottom. And then I'm gonna add a couple of inches of water to the bottom of this. Now, pressure canners don't work right if they don't have a little bit of water in them. This thing needs to create some steam in order to then create the pressure within the canner. And the idea behind this pressure is that when you increase the pressure within a container, you then increase the temperature at which water boils. The more PSI of pressure, the higher the temperature at which water boils. And the funny thing about boiling water is you can't get it above 212 degrees. It creates its own cooling process as it boils. You can never boil water at 325, 350, 370 degrees. It just won't happen unless you increase the pressure where that water is then contained. Inside here, we can get the boiling temperature of water up over 300 degrees, and that is what is going to create a food safe environment, okay? Botulism likes to live in a, what do they call it, an anaerobic environment, an environment where there is no oxygen. So in order to prevent that and other pathogens and things from taking hold within here, we want to pressure can it, pressure cook it. Don't ever do meat in a water bath canner. That's something that you would use for jellies and jams and some vegetables. There's certain things you can do, but pickles and whatnot. But for meat, we want to pressure can it. So here we go. We're just gonna start loading these jars into the pressure canner. Nice and easy. I can get 7 jars in there, but remember I said I had 9. I can actually do 14 in here. I've got another shelf that goes on top, and I put a couple more jars on top of there. Now, remember that vinegar that I told you to keep earlier? We're gonna take that, what little vinegar's left, and just pour it in there. And the reason for that is it actually helps keep your jars nice and clear and clean, and prevents a cloudiness from on the outside of the jar. I've got my jars down underneath, and then I've got my lid, or I'm sorry, my shelf, and then a couple more jars sitting on top. I could have done actually up to 14 jars in here if I had them. So now we're just going to put the lid on this thing, and like I said, they're all different. This particular one that I like has an arrow there and a notch there. You see how this reaches over and grabs this lip to help prevent it from popping loose. And then we put all these things on, and you're going to want to kind of hand torque these down. Do one and then do the one across from it. Now what I like to do is I like to look right here and make sure that this thing's sitting pretty close to even all the way across. Okay, it's a little tighter on that end, so I'm going to tighten it over here first, and again all the way around I'm looking for it to be pretty evenly secure. Okay, and then we start tightening them down. So I'll start here and I'll go straight across from this, tighten that, and then I'll come across over here, tighten that, then I'll go straight across from that, tighten that, then I'll come back over here across from that, tighten that, come across from here, tighten that. Okay, we're gonna get them all nice and tight. We take this off. We're gonna talk about this in just a minute, and then we turn the burner on. All right, guys. Once this water inside here starts to come to a boil, you're going to begin to get a steady stream of steam coming out of this vent valve here, if in fact you're using the All-American pressure canner. Now, what I have here really is not yet steam, it's mostly air. And the idea here is that we're evacuating as much air as possible out of this container and trying to fill it with steam rather than air. That's kind of important, because if you don't do that, you're not going to reach the true pressure that you were targeting, and it may not process properly. So what we're going to do is we're just going to let this continue to vent for several minutes until we have steam coming out of this and not air. All right, now you can see that we now have steam coming out of there instead of air, okay? Which, I know, there's also air and steam. But now we're gonna start introducing the pressure, guys. And that's where this little weight comes in handy, okay? You can see that this weight has some numbers on it, 5, 10, 15, hopefully you guys can see that. And what those numbers equate to is the pressure at which this is then going to relieve off of this valve, okay? If that makes sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this now. The pressure that you want to use is going to be between 10 and 15 psi, and that's going to depend on your elevation. Obviously, barometric pressure changes from sea level all the way up to, high elevations. So we're trying to have a controlled barometric pressure within this pot, and how high you are above sea level affects that. We don't even get as deep into the science, but I'm going to set this on 10 psi because we're below 1,000 feet. We're at like 350 feet of elevation here in Northeast Mississippi. If you were above 1,000 feet of elevation, you'd actually set this on the 15. So we're just going to take this, set it right on there. All right, now watch that gauge start to climb. So what's going to happen when this gets to 10 psi is this is going to begin to relieve, to rattle, okay? I'll show you that. So we've reached 10 psi on our pressure gauge, and our weight is also agreeing that we're at 10 psi because it's now bouncing and allowing some pressure to release. So what I'm going to do is actually turn the heat down now. And I've done this enough times that I know on my stove now exactly where to set it to maintain that 10 psi. If it drops below 10 psi, guys, or for those of y'all above 1,000 feet in elevation, if it drops below 15 psi, you're in trouble. You have to start over again. So we want to keep this right at 10 psi, and we're then going to set a timer right here, and I got 75 minutes right there. You want to process these for 75 minutes if you're doing pints, or for 90 minutes if you're doing quarts. And you don't want to mix them. You don't want to do quarts and pints and process them all at 90 minutes because you're then really over processing your pints. So do all pints together or all quarts together. These are pints. We're going to do 75 minutes. We're going to keep it at 10 psi, and then we're going to see what we got. Time's up, guys. It has been 75 minutes. What I'm going to do right now is turn the heat off, okay? And then we have to wait. All right, this thing still has a lot of pressure in it. The last thing you want to do is pull that off right there. If you pull that off, you're going to depressurize the contents of this thing super fast. You're going to make a huge mess in your kitchen, and all your jars are going to break. All right, you don't want to do that. So we're just going to walk away from this thing and let it cool down until the pressure drops all the way back down to 0 before we open this up. My pressure's come back down to 0. I took my weight off. Now we can open this thing up. Now it's a good idea to let this sit for about 5 minutes after you take the lid off before you start taking the jars out. That's not a requirement for any kind of food safety or anything. It's just you're gonna get more success with the lid sealing if you don't mess with them, if you don't touch them. I'm gonna go ahead and pull one of these out right now because I'm a rebel. Set it there so we can show you guys what this looks like. Look at how that jar is still boiling inside. That's pretty cool looking. But that is a pint of home canned, jarred venison, deer meat, and it's gonna be shelf stable, and we're gonna put it on the pantry, no refrigeration needed. I got 9 of these. This is awesome, guys. Once you start doing this, you're gonna love it. It's a lot of fun to do, and it really makes you feel good to know that you're saving your family money, you know what you're putting in their bodies, and you're being prepared for some sort of a crisis. There it is, guys. This is not rocket surgery or brain science. This is actually not that complicated, and you need to be doing this. I've got 9 jars of home canned meat right here that are shelf stable, that have saved my family money. I have peace of mind knowing what's in them, knowing what we're putting into our bodies, and they prepared us for a crisis situation. So thanks for watching, guys. Really appreciate it. Put some questions, comments, tell me what you think down below. If you have a question, I'll absolutely try to answer it if I know the answer. If not, I'll probably Google it and answer it for you anyway. And get yourselves a pressure canner, people. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and click the little bell down below so you get notifications the next time we post a video, and stand by for more of these videos specifically focused on food bank.
Ow!